Hello, everybody. Today I wanted to do a poem called Stammer by the Malayalam poet K Satchidanandan. Uh, so, first we'll read the note on the author. K Satchidanandan was born in 1946 and he is a bilingual poet who writes in Malayalam and English. Bilingual means he uses two languages. One is Malayalam, the other is English. He was born in the Thrissur district of Kerala and studied masters in English at Maharaja's College, Ernakulam. So he is a postgraduate in English from Maharaja's College, Ernakulam. He worked as a professor of English in different institutions. He has published 24 collections of poetry and several critical essays and travelogues. So he's got a vast output of literature to his name. He has published 24 books of poetry, several critical essays, and travelogues. Travelogues are records of trips that one takes. He has translated many of his Malayalam poems into English. Satchidanandan has won many awards and medals. His works have been translated into many languages. Now we'll come to the note on the poem itself. The original Malayalam poem Vikku is translated into English by the poetess Stammer. Now, Vikku is the title of the original poem written by the poet. It is translated by the poet himself into Stammer. What is a stammer? A stammer is commonly thought of as a speech handicap. For example, the way normal people speak is their continuous flow of language, but in some people they tend to hesitate. As I wanted to say, that so that is an example of a stammer. So this is about this speech handicap called stammer. According to the poet, stammer is not an impediment but a different mode of communication. So most people think that a stammer is annoying or irritating or upsetting, but the poet has a different take on this. He views stammer, it's not an impediment, it's not a handicap, but a different mode of communication. So what are the two main modes of communication we have? Speech and writing. Like that, stammer is also a mode of communication. How can a stammer be a mode of communication? How can it be a method of communication? It is in the silence that falls between the words. Now, a silence is a very important part of speech. For example, if you were to speak continuously without pausing, without any differentiations in tone, there's no rising tone or falling tone, there are no pauses, juncture, variations in intonation, pitch, etc., your speech would become monotonous and in fact it would become meaningless. So a pause, a silence, is essential to convey meaning. And if you take the written form of the language, you see that between two words usually you have a gap. The gap between two words of printed material, any two words of printed material, that represents a pause that differentiates one word from the other. So what the poet is trying to say is that the silence that falls when a person stammers, it is a method of communications. That is, it's a method of communication. That is, the pauses can be meaningful. The suggested speech, the staggered speech has the potentiality to be highly suggestive and multi-layered as opposed to clear, vociferous and unobstructed speech. So the staggered is when something is piled up. When a person stammers, as as I was saying, when a person stammers, it is called staggered speech. The staggered speech has a potentiality to be highly suggestive and multi-layered. So there are different layers of meaning in the pauses of a stammer, which is as opposed to clear, vociferous, and unobstructed speech. So, which is monodirectional and limited in its ability to be expressive and evocative. So, what the poet is saying is that normal speech is clear. Okay, it is clear, it is vociferous. Vociferous means it is heard by every person, every listener in a room or a place. It is vociferous and it is unobstructed. But most of this speech is monodirectional. It's in one direction. It is from the speaker to the listener. And it's limited in its ability to be expressive and evocative. Now, one example of how silences can be evocative can be given in, for example, when you hear, a religious chant. For example, if one of the common religious chants people here listen to in the morning is the Suprabhatam. Kaushalya Supraja Rama Purva Sandhya Pravartate Uttishta Narasha Dula Kartavyam Daivamangitam. So there it is, the variations in the tone, they have the potential to be evocative. Evocative means they make a person act, because he feels like acting. So what the poet is saying is that the silences in uh, in a stammer have the silences in a stammer have the potential to be evocative, right? They can be meaningful. The pause between two words in the speech is as much significant as the gap between the words that make up a poem. So even the silences can be meaningful. For example, if you have two friends, and they're comfortable in each other's company, then often they may sit silently, right? There's not much said between them, but there's nevertheless unseen bond between them, right? Or it can be a hurt silence between two people when not much is said, but a lot is conveyed through the hurt silence between one person and the other. Or a silence can also be a stony silence. For example, between two rivals, right? Two rivals in a place or in, any situation. A stony silence when nothing is said and everything seems to have, come to a halt. So, you see, these silences, the pause between two words in a speech, the silence or the pause between two words in a speech is as much significant as the gap between the words that make up a poem. The silence that exists between two spoken words is the most meaningful of all the words. So silence is very meaningful, right? It conveys a lot. It makes a person act, think, or behave in certain ways. So it is as essential to moderate your speech. Moderate means the way you say something is as important as what you say, right? So that is what the poem is about. So now we'll come to the poem itself. So first, to begin with, the poet says quite clearly, a stammer is no handicap. It is not an impediment. It is a mode of speech, right? Categorically, he says it is a mode of speech. A stammer is a silence that falls between the word and its meaning. Now, you see, when a person says something, right, it takes some time, not, let's say, it doesn't take a long time, but it takes some time for the meaning of the words to be understood clearly by the listener. So in that interval between what is said, what is heard, and the meaning understood, there is a silence. So that is the stammer. A stammer is a silence that falls between the word and its meaning. Okay? Just as lameness is the silence that falls between the word and the deed. So the poet brings in another handicap, that is lameness. Lameness is being crippled in the arms or the legs, right? So when a cripple is coaxed into acting, right? It is so a stammer is the silence that which is like that of a lame person trying to walk or trying to lift up something with his crippled limbs, right? Uh, so the poet continues in the third stanza: did the stammer precede language or succeed it? So when we go back to the origins of language, when we go back, let's imagine that language as it exists now did not always exist. If we go back in time, and there are people who study the origins of language, there are linguists who study the origins of language, and if you go back right down to it, right back to ancient times, to the time of the cavemen, when there was no speech, there was no communication, right? There were only guttural sounds, the sounds made in the throat, like right between. So we'll imagine that those were the origins of language, right? Um, but then, as time passed, as the cavemen how somehow became more civilized, and a time came when the first guttural sound, first guttural syllable, something like that, was understood by another, okay, another ancient caveman. Okay, so that meaning, what seems to be meaningless to us, but it actually conveyed meaning. It's like a stammer, right? The stammer could be a relic of the methods of communication used in our prehistoric ancestors. There are many relics, there are many parts of the our prehistoric ancestors in our mind. For example, all the instincts that we have to sleep, to eat, to do so many things, to drink, all these are relics of the minds of our prehistoric ancestors. Like that, the guttural sounds, the stammer, the staggered speech could also be a relic of the prehistoric ancestors, which still lives in us. Okay, so the poet asks, okay, even today we stammer. So the poet asks, did the stammer precede? Did it come before language, or did it succeed language? Once language was developed to a great extent, people still stammered. So did stammer precede language, or did it succeed it? Is it only a dialect or a language itself? Right? So a dialect is a version of a language. For example, there are many varieties of Kannada or Hindi or Marathi or any other language, but the version of the language spoken in one region is not like the version of the language spoken in another region. So those versions of the same language, for example, the Kannada spoken in Bangalore and that spoken in Dakshin Kannada, right? Those versions of Kannada are dialects. So the poet asks, is a stammer only a dialect, or is it a language itself? Right? Are the silences, okay, in a staggered speech, are they a language in themselves? These questions make linguists stammer. So when you ask a professional scientist of language, a linguist, such questions, the linguists themselves are unclear, right? The linguists themselves cannot answer such questions, even though they may have spent a long time studying language, right? So next stanza, each time we stammer, we are offering a sacrifice to the god of meanings, right? So You see, each time we pause, each time we, you know, when we hesitate, right, we're conveying a great deal of meaning, right? So each time we stammer, says the poet, we are offering a sacrifice to the god of meanings. So, in the Indian pantheon, that is the number of gods, there are gods for each and every function, each and every part of the body, each and every object of nature, like the tree, the stone, the rat, the elephant. There's so many gods in the Indian pantheon, right? So now the poet brings in what may be yet another god which can be added to the Indian pantheon, that is the god of meanings, right? Is in Kannada, you can perhaps be roughly translated as Arthadevate, right? So each time we stammer, says the poet, each time we pause, each time we hesitate, in that pause, when we convey meaning, we are offering a sacrifice to the god of meanings. When a whole people stammer, says the poet, stammer becomes a mother tongue as it is with us now. So, mother tongue, how do we learn the mother tongue? Nobody says, for example, if I say in Kannada, Nanige ondu lota coffee beku. Nobody taught me to say that. I automatically pick up the words by the words spoken by those around me. That's how the mother tongue is learned, right? It's a spoken language, right? Nobody taught me to say that. So, when a whole nation, when a whole people stammer, see, now the poet talks about a whole nation stammering. Does a whole nation stammer? Do we all stammer? Do all the people in all the countries stammer? When a whole people stammer, stammer becomes their mother tongue. So, now the stammering becomes, it's like their mother tongue. They learn to stammer. Each child in the succeeding generation stammers. Now, we may think that we don't stammer. Our speech is clear, unobstructed, and vociferous. But the poet says, it is so with us now. We are stammering. We are hesitating. Because there is no perfect communication between two people. See, if I say one thing and the listener, many times intentionally, the listener translates it according to his capacity and it comes out as something else, right? So, okay. So, the intended meaning to be conveyed and what is actually conveyed, they're two different things. So, there's no perfect communication possible. Let's say between father and son, parents, father and son, let's say the parent belongs to one profession, the son wants to follow another profession. Each becomes an expert. One becomes an expert in business, the other becomes an expert in, let's say, physics. There's no communication part, there's no language, common language, right? And let's say between any two people, okay, I mean one thing, but the meaning is not conveyed. It is understood, misunderstood, and that misunderstanding can be perhaps intentional, right? And so it goes on. So the whole nation, the whole people, all the people stammer, okay? So if there's no communication, if you can't talk with your friend, then what's the use? You keep silent, right? You keep silent. But as the poet says, the silence that falls between two people can convey meaning, right? So the whole poet says that really, we all stammer, right? God too must have stammered when he created man. That is why all the words of man carry different meanings. So God too must have stammered when he created man. Now there are many theories of creation. Okay, if you look at the religious texts, for example, in Hinduism, they say the word Om, created, creation, everything in creation, not only the earth, not only the planets, the whole of the universe was created when, God intonated Om. But the poet says God too must have stammered when he created Om. God must have said something like, oh, 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 oh. So he must have stammered, says the poet. How can God have stammered when he created man? God is a perfect being. We are perfect beings. That's what we think. Nobody can, there's no equal to us. So many ideas of pride, ego, all these, which are well known, right? When God created man, he must have stammered, says the poet. So, as a result of that stammer when he created man, that is why all the words of man carry different meanings, right? So, this is a literal interpretation. If you open a dictionary, even a small dictionary, like for example, Oxford Learner's Dictionary, and you come to the first letter of the dictionary, A is called the indefinite article. It's got 26 different meanings. You can put a meaning in a sentence, a different meaning in a different sentence. You can use the same a with two different meanings in two different sentences in the same sentence. Okay, just the letter A or the word A has got 26, 27 different meanings. So it is with all the 500,000 words in the vocabulary, in the lexicon of English, or you say Kannada, or you say any language, right? So again, each word carries a different meaning. Now I say something else is understood, something else is reported, and that gets acted upon. That becomes a whole set of, it starts with a misunderstanding, okay? And it snowballs into something quite unintended, either by the speaker or the reporter. It snowballs, right? So, for example, there's a story of Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein was asked by a newspaper reporter to describe his home life. Okay, what he did at home. So Professor Einstein said, I am hardly ever at home, but when I am home, I'm commonly occupied with my physics, with my theoretical physics. At home, until midnight, I work on my problems in physics, and because of this preoccupation that I have with my subject, whatever salary or whatever money I get, I have to give to my wife because she has to look after the household expenses. Now, Einstein described his home life in this way. The very next day, the newspaper report came out. Professor Einstein is made to work hard. He has to burn the midnight oil, even at home. And his wife takes all the money from him. Okay. Now, this is the report. So, they both mean the same, but the words of man carry different meanings, right? So, what is said, what is reported, what effect that has on listeners, plural, that is, because God stammered when he created man. That's what the poet says. That is why everything he utters, from his prayers to his commands, stammers, like poetry. So, everything a person says, everything he utters, from his prayers, from the religious mantras, to the short sentences, come here, sit down, to the commands, okay? They're all misunderstood by the listener. Okay, but it's like poetry, says the poet. How is this, a command? If a teacher commands a student, come here, okay, sit down, show me your homework. If he commands. Now, it seems on the surface of it to be what? To be cruel. To be, for a 6-year child or 6-year-old child to be talked to like this, a 6-year-old child doesn't understand. This teacher is being almost like a dictator. Come here, sit down. Where is your homework? But you see, it is misunderstood by a listener. We may feel the teacher should not talk like this, but really it is misunderstood, because if the child were to be pampered, please come here, why don't you show me your homework, have a seat, if that were to be a continuous process, this pampering, a child would become good for nothing, right? So, as one of the great authors says, even our misfortunes, even our embarrassments, even our all the negative things that happen to us in life, okay, uh, they are the material with which to make our art, right? So all our embarrassments, misfortunes are materials, they are resources to fashion our art. So the art is the art of life. Whatever negative things happen, they're all resources to fashion our art. Just as when the parent scolds the child, beats the child, when the teacher scolds the child, beats, and the child becomes a first class student, he becomes a first class citizen, and so on. So you see, from the commands to our prayers, everything stammers, but these are like poetry. Just as a poetry poem is a song meant to be sung, our life is something to be celebrated, right? So the poet ends on a note of optimism. Okay, so that is the poem Stammer. Thank you.